She just wanted to survive work, until an unexpected kiss from her own boss turned her life upside down. And in the midst of the lie that was supposed to protect them, the most dangerous feeling of all began to emerge. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post every day. Continuing. Marina Foster adjusted her black dress for the 10th time, observing her reflection in the car window that dropped her off at the entrance of the Grand Brighton Hotel. The Bar Council's charity ball was the kind of event she religiously avoided, a charade of fake smiles where every handshake hid a negotiation and every toast celebrated another alliance of power. But this time, there was no choice. As a co-founder of the sustainable architecture firm she had built from scratch over the past 7 years, she needed to make an appearance. Her affordable housing projects had gained national recognition, and ignoring important invitations could mean losing contracts that sustained not only her professional dream, but also the jobs of 23 employees who depended on her. She took a deep breath as she entered the main hall. The atmosphere exuded rehearsed opulence, crystal chandeliers reflecting golden light on women adorned with jewels, and men whose suits cost more than the average worker's annual salary. Marina felt completely out of place, even knowing she deserved to be there as much as anyone. Her path had not been paved with a silver spoon or important surnames. Every achievement had cost sleepless nights studying on a full scholarship, weekends working on construction sites to pay for college, and years building a reputation based purely on competence and ethics. Across the hall, Robert Montague observed the crowd with the same profound boredom he felt at all these events. At 42, he held the position of High Court Judge at the Royal Courts of Justice, London, being the youngest to achieve such a position in the court's history. His reputation for integrity and rigor was known throughout the country. Experienced lawyers trembled when defending cases in his courtroom, not out of cruelty, but from the absolute certainty that no favor, workaround, or political influence could sway his legal conscience. He was at the event out of institutional obligation, representing the court on yet another night of networking that he considered tiresome theater. Robert couldn't remember the last time he had genuinely enjoyed a social function. His personal life was an emotional desert he had built himself, brick by brick, over the years. The weight of judicial responsibilities, the constant pressure of making decisions that affected entire lives, and the need to maintain an impeccable public image had turned relationships into luxuries he couldn't afford. Women approached him interested in his status, power, influence, never in the man behind the robe. That's when he saw her. Marina walked among the groups with a natural elegance that contrasted with the affectation around her. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't force seductive smiles. She didn't gesticulate dramatically for attention. She simply existed in the space with an authenticity that was almost provocative in that environment of appearances. Robert found himself observing the way she held her champagne glass, firmly without ostentation, as if it were just a tool to keep her hands occupied while tolerating obligatory conversations. When their eyes met across the hall, something shifted in the air between them. It wasn't love at first sight, it was recognition, as if two souls tired of pretending identified in each other, a rare opportunity to let their guard down. Marina felt her heart quicken, not because he was handsome, though he was, with those prematurely graying hair and dark eyes that carried a disturbing intensity, but because for the first time in years, someone truly saw her. He didn't evaluate her dress, her social posture, her connections. He simply saw her. Robert approached without thinking, as if a magnetic force pulled him. He introduced himself simply as Robert, purposely omitting his position and titles. She responded by being just Marina, without mentioning professional awards or business achievements. The conversation flowed with startling naturalness. They talked about architecture and justice, about the loneliness that accompanies leadership positions, about the difficulty of finding genuine people in worlds where everyone wears masks. For the next 3 hours, they danced as if they were the only ones in the hall. Robert couldn't remember the last time he had laughed naturally, and Marina discovered she could be herself without fear of judgment. When he suggested they go somewhere more private, she didn't hesitate. Not out of impulse or irresponsibility, but because she knew that opportunities like this didn't come twice in a lifetime. In the hotel elevator, the tension between them was palpable. Robert pressed the 15th floor button with hands that trembled imperceptibly. Marina watched their reflections in the metallic mirror, two mature, successful people who normally made calculated decisions, allowing themselves to follow only instinct. When the doors opened, he extended his hand, and she accepted it unreservedly. The suite was elegant, but not ostentatious. Robert had chosen the hotel more for the discretion it offered than for its luxury. As soon as the door closed behind them, the intensity of the moment hit them like a wave. They didn't kiss. Immediately, they stood still, observing each other, knowing that crossing that line would change something fundamental. "I don't usually do this," Marina whispered, not as an excuse, but as a confession. "Neither do I," Robert replied, approaching slowly. "Neither do I." When they finally kissed, it was with an urgency that surprised both. It wasn't gentle or cautious. It was desperate, as if years of solitude and emotional control had finally found a release valve. Robert's hands trembled as they touched Marina's face, and she felt tears she didn't know were trapped finally stream down. It wasn't just physical desire. It was emotional need, the hunger for real connection that both had denied for too long. They made love with an intensity that went far beyond the physical. Between caresses and whispers, they shared fears they had never verbalized, dreams they had forgotten to pursue, emotional scars they thought they had overcome alone. Robert spoke of the overwhelming pressure of carrying the weight of justice on his shoulders, of sleepless nights, replaying decisions that had ruined or saved lives. Marina spoke of the struggle to be taken seriously in a male-dominated market, of sacrificing personal relationships to build a career that would prove her worth. As the sun began to rise over Brighton Beach, they remained intertwined, talking about emotional architecture, the way we build walls to protect ourselves and bridges to connect. Marina drew imaginary patterns on Robert's chest with her finger, while he stroked her hair, both aware that this morning represented something neither of them knew how to name. "I need to go," Marina murmured reluctantly, looking at her watch. She had an important meeting at 9 in the morning with investors for a housing project that could change her career. Robert kissed her one last time, a long, deep kiss that seemed to try to capture the essence of those moments to keep forever. "Can I see you again?" he asked, vulnerability clear in his voice. "I'd love to," she replied genuinely. They exchanged numbers, kissed once more, and she left behind not only a subtle perfume, but the certainty that something fundamental had changed in both their lives. All the way home, Marina smiled involuntarily. She felt lighter, more alive, more connected with herself than she had in years. Robert, in turn, stayed in the suite for another hour, watching the city awaken through the window, processing feelings he was sure he had lost forever. At 8 in the morning, he sent the first message. "I still can't believe yesterday happened. You changed something in me that I didn't know needed changing." Marina's reply came 20 minutes later. "I'm also trying to understand what that was. I just know I don't want it to end here." Over the following weeks, they developed a connection that surprised both. Robert discovered he could be funny, affectionate, spontaneous, versions of himself he had buried under layers of judicial responsibility. Marina found someone who saw her as a complete woman, not just a successful professional or potential business partner. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, shared meals in discreet restaurants, walked in parks where they could just be two adults in love discovering each other. Their intimacy was revealing in ways that went far beyond the physical. Robert, always controlled and measured in public, surrendered completely, allowing Marina to see his vulnerability, his needs, his deepest desires. She, who had always needed to be strong and independent, allowed herself to be cared for, protected, loved in a way she had never imagined possible. They made love as if each encounter was simultaneously the first and the last, with an urgency born of the unconscious knowledge that something so perfect could not last forever. But reality has a cruel way of interrupting dreams. It was on a rainy Tuesday that Marina's world began to crumble. She was in her office reviewing plans for the new housing complex when her secretary announced the arrival of a court officer. Marina frowned. She had no pending legal issues, owed nothing to the government, was not involved in any litigation. She received the sealed envelope with curiosity that quickly turned to horror. The summons was clear and formal. Marina Foster was being called to testify as a witness in the case investigating one of the biggest public bidding corruption scandals of recent years. Aston and Associates Construction, responsible for multi-million-pound projects across England, was accused of fraud, overbilling, and bribing public officials. Her name appeared in the records because her firm had competed for some of the same tenders, always losing to overbilled and technically inferior projects. Marina read the document 3 times before reality hit her hard. It wasn't just a summons to testify. It was a forced invitation to enter one of the most closely watched legal processes in the country, where every word would be scrutinized by the media, every move analyzed by the most powerful lawyers in the market. And she, who had always maintained impeccable ethical conduct, found herself dragged into the center of a hurricane that could destroy everything she had built. But the real shock was yet to come. That same afternoon, she met with Edward Miller, one of the few lawyers she trusted, a friend since college. Edward had built a solid career defending labor causes and had a reputation for being brutally honest with his clients. When Marina showed him the summons, his face visibly paled. "Marina, you need to tell me one thing, and you need to be completely honest," Edward said, sitting heavily behind his desk. "Do you have any kind of relationship with High Court Judge Robert Montague?" Marina's blood ran cold. "How do you know about Robert?" "Because he is the judge responsible for this case," Edward replied, his voice carrying a grave tone she had never heard before. "Marina, do you understand what this means? If there is any kind of personal relationship between you, anything that could be interpreted as influence or favoritism, both your reputation and his career will be destroyed. I'm not talking about a fleeting scandal. I'm talking about career termination, investigation for impropriety, possible criminal prosecution." Marina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. For the past few weeks, she had lived in what could only be described as a bubble of happiness. Robert sent affectionate messages every day. Flowers arrived at her office without special occasion. Intimate dinners where they talked until dawn had become routine. She had begun to imagine a future together, to think about introducing him to her parents, to fantasize about a shared life where 2 successful professionals would build something greater than their individual careers. "Edward, what exactly are you saying?" Marina asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm saying you need to choose. Either you completely end all contact with Judge Montague before anyone finds out, or you prepare to see your professional life destroyed. And it's not just about you. If they discover that a judge had personal relations with a witness in a case he is presiding over, Robert will be removed, investigated, and will likely lose everything he has built. This case is being monitored by the national media, Marina. Any mistake will be amplified 1,000 times." The reality was brutal and inescapable. Marina knew enough about the judicial system to understand that Edward was being generous by describing only the professional consequences. In a country where corruption and injustice was a sensitive issue, any suspicion of favoritism could result in criminal investigations, revocation of political rights, imprisonment. And Robert, with his reputation for integrity built over decades, would be the perfect target for anyone wanting to make a public example. 4. The rest of the afternoon, Marina tried to work, but it was impossible to concentrate. Every line she drew, every project she reviewed, seemed insignificant in the face of the situation's magnitude. When she arrived home that night, she found a message from Robert. "I miss you. How about dinner tomorrow at a place of your choice?" The innocence of the message almost made her cry. Robert had no idea of the hurricane approaching. He was planning romantic encounters, while she discovered that any contact between them could destroy both. Marina spent the night awake, alternating between wanting to run into his arms and confess everything, and the paralyzing terror of imagining the consequences. The next morning, she made the most painful decision of her life. "Robert, I need to tell you something," she wrote. then deleted it, rewrote it, deleted it again. How do you explain to someone you love that you can no longer see them? How do you put into words that the truest relationship you've ever had needs to end to protect both of you? Finally, she decided on the necessary cruelty of brevity. I can't see you anymore. It was a mistake and it needs to stop here. Robert's reply arrived in 15 minutes. Marina, what happened? Can we talk? No, please don't contact me again. For the next 2 hours, Robert sent increasingly desperate messages. If I did something wrong, tell me, we can fix anything. Marina, please, at least explain. I don't understand what changed since yesterday. Finally, I love you. At least give me a chance to understand. Marina read each message with tears streaming down her face, but she didn't reply to any. At 4 in the afternoon, she blocked Robert's number on all apps, cancelled the weekend plans they had, made together, and spent the rest of the day crying as she hadn't since adolescence. On the other side of London, Robert was living his own hell. Marina's sudden change in behavior was incomprehensible. Just 24 hours earlier, she had fallen asleep in his arms, whispering that she had never felt so complete with anyone. How does someone go from declarations of love to total rejection without any explanation? He tried to call, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He sent flowers to her office, but they were returned. He even considered showing up in person, but the final tone of her messages made it clear he wouldn't be welcome. For 3 days, Robert operated on autopilot. He conducted hearings with his usual competence, analyzed cases with his usual rigor, maintained the professional facade that was his hallmark. But internally he was destroyed. He had lowered all emotional defenses for Marina, allowed himself to feel hope and vulnerability for the first time in years, imagined a future that now seemed to have been a cruel illusion. It was on Thursday that everything became clear. Robert was reviewing the witness list for upcoming hearings when he saw the name, Marina Foster. For a moment he thought it was a coincidence. Marina wasn't an uncommon name and Foster was an extremely popular surname. But when he checked the attached documents, there was her photo on the ID, the office address he knew, all the data confirming that the woman he had fallen in love with was a witness in the most important case of his career. The understanding hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Marina had not rejected him out of whim or because she had lost interest. She was protecting him. When she discovered she would be a witness in the case he was judging, she had the wisdom and courage to do what needed to be done to preserve both of them, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. Robert locked himself in his chambers for 2 hours, processing the magnitude of the situation. As a judge, he knew exactly the ethical implications of what had happened. Technically, he should recuse himself from the case, report the conflict of interest to superior bodies, face a disciplinary investigation. But that would mean publicly explaining his relationship with Marina, exposing her to the very scrutiny she was trying to avoid. On the other hand, continuing to judge the case would be a blatant violation of judicial ethics, even if no favoritism occurred. Robert knew Marina well enough to know that she was incapable of any kind of corruption. But the judicial system did not operate based on personal convictions. It operated based on protocols and appearances, and the appearance would be devastating if anyone found out. That night, Robert walked along Brighton Beach trying to find a solution that didn't exist. He passed the Grand Brighton Hotel, where everything had begun, and felt a pang of physical pain, remembering the morning they woke up intertwined, planning a future that now seemed impossible. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, perfectly reflecting his emotional state. Marina, on the other side of the city, was living a similar torment. She had told everything to her best friend, Julia, who listened in silence before offering what support she could, but no miraculous solution. "You did the right thing," Julia said, "but that doesn't make it any easier." Over the next few weeks, both tried to move on. Robert buried himself in work with an intensity that worried even his most dedicated assistants. He arrived at court before dawn, left after midnight, reviewed every case with an almost obsessive detail. His colleagues commented that he seemed to be trying to process all the pain through physical and mental exhaustion. Marina adopted a similar strategy, accepting new projects, traveling for presentations in other cities, anything that would keep her mind occupied. But in moments of silence, in traffic, before sleeping, during tedious meetings, the memory of Robert hit her like an unexpected wave. The scent of his perfume that still lingered on one of the shirts he had forgotten in her apartment. The good morning message that no longer arrived. The absence of someone who, in such a short time, had become a fundamental part of her emotional routine. The cruelest part was that both knew the love still existed. It hadn't diminished or turned into resentment. If anything, the impossibility of the situation had intensified their feelings, transforming them into a kind of romantic pain that hurt, but that neither of them wanted to completely forget. 3 weeks after their forced separation, Marina received the official date for her testimony. She would have to come face to face with Robert in a formal setting, answer questions about professional matters, while pretending she didn't personally know the man who would be conducting the hearing. The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and, secretly, a relief. At least she would see his face again, even if for a few hours and under the worst possible circumstances. Robert also received the hearing schedule and saw that Marina's testimony was set for a Tuesday in November. He spent the preceding days mentally rehearsing what it would be like to see her again, how he would manage to maintain professional composure while his heart was breaking. He knew she would appear impeccably dressed, prepared, professional, and that he would have to treat her as he would any witness, with respectful detachment and judicial objectivity. On the eve of the hearing, Robert stayed up late reviewing the case files. Not because he needed to, he knew every detail by heart, but because he needed something to occupy his mind. That's when he noticed something strange in the documents related to Marina's firm. The dates didn't perfectly match. Some emails had slightly different formatting. Certain information was too specific to be coincidences. A suspicion began to grow in his mind. Robert had enough experience to recognize when evidence was too good to be true, and the more he analyzed the documents involving Marina, the more convinced he became that something was wrong. Very wrong. The hearing would be the next morning, but Robert had a premonition that he would discover much more than just testimonies. The courtroom at the Royal Courts of Justice, London, was packed that November morning. Journalists occupied the rows reserved for the public. Prosecutors and lawyers reviewed documents at their tables, and the typical buzz of high-profile cases filled the air. The case against Aston & Associates Construction had become a symbol of the fight against corruption in England, and every hearing was followed as if it were a public spectacle. Marina arrived at 8 in the morning, an hour before the session began. She wore an impeccable navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, discreet makeup that disguised the sleepless nights of the past few weeks. Edward accompanied her, offering moral support and legal guidance. Though both knew there wasn't much to do but tell the truth, Marina had spent the last 3 days reviewing all documents related to the tenders her firm had participated in, preparing to answer any question with technical precision and absolute transparency. When the courtroom doors opened and Robert entered to preside over the hearing, Marina felt her heart stop for a few seconds. He was exactly as always, upright posture, solemn expression, black robe that lent even more gravity to his presence. But Marina knew those eyes well enough to notice the tension he hid from the assembled crowd. For a fraction of a second, when their gazes met, she saw a vulnerability that no one else in the room would be able to perceive. Robert, in turn, needed all his judicial experience not to betray the whirlwind of emotions that the sight of Marina provoked. She was beautiful and composed as always, but he noticed her discreet weight loss, the slight tension around her eyes, signs that the past few weeks had been as difficult for her as for him. Protocol required him to treat everyone present with the same professional detachment, but knowing that the woman he loved was there as a witness in his court was a cruel irony of fate. "I declare the session open," Robert announced in a firm voice, beginning another stage of the process that was changing both their lives in ways none of those present imagined. The first 2 hours were occupied by the testimonies of other witnesses, construction company employees, tax auditors, engineers who had worked on the suspicious projects. Marina watched attentively, not only because her own testimony was approaching, but because she wanted to fully understand the context in which her firm had been involved. Robert conducted the interrogations with the surgical precision that had made him famous, asking direct questions, exposing contradictions, extracting information that even the lawyers themselves seemed not to expect. At 11 o'clock it was her turn. "I call witness Marina Foster," Robert announced, his voice maintaining the same professional tone he had used with everyone else. Marina walked to the witness stand, swore to tell the truth with her right hand raised, and sat in the chair a few meters away from Robert. The physical proximity was both comforting and torturous. She could feel his presence, notice the small gestures she knew so well, but she had to pretend he was a stranger. The public prosecutor began the questioning, and Marina responded with clarity and objectivity about the tenders her firm had competed for, the projects presented, the technical criteria that differentiated her proposals from the competitors. Robert observed her attentively, not only evaluating the content of her answers, but noting the way she gestured when explaining technical details, the genuine passion that shone through when she spoke about sustainable architecture, the absolute integrity that permeated every word. It was during the defense's cross-examination that things began to get strange. The construction company's lawyer, a 60-year-old man with a reputation for being ruthless in interrogations, presented a series of emails allegedly exchanged between Marina and one of the company directors. The emails suggested irregular negotiations, proposals for payment for privileged information about other tenders, conversations that, if true, would seriously compromise Marina's professional reputation. "Do you deny any knowledge of these emails?" the lawyer asked, theatrically displaying the documents. Marina quickly read the papers and replied firmly, "I categorically deny it. I have never had any communication with Mr. Charles Aston about tenders or any other professional matter. These emails are fake." The lawyer smiled condescendingly. "Ms. Foster, the metadata of these emails has been verified by experts. The dates, times, and senders match. How do you explain that?" Marina felt a chill run down her spine but maintained her composure. "I explain it by saying that if the metadata matches, then someone had unauthorized access to my email system, but I can categorically state that I never sent or received these messages." It was at this moment that Robert intervened. "I would like to examine these documents personally," he said, extending his hand to receive the papers. For the next 15 minutes, Robert analyzed each email with the attention of someone who had spent decades identifying inconsistencies in legal documents. Marina watched him work, seeing the intense concentration on his face, the way he slightly frowned when something bothered him. Even in the midst of that legal nightmare, she felt proud of his competence and dedication. "There are some technical questions about these documents that need to be clarified," Robert finally said. "I temporarily suspend this hearing so that the emails can be submitted for a more detailed technical forensic analysis." The construction company's lawyer protested vehemently. The documents had already been examined. Any delay would only benefit the defense. The process was dragging on unnecessarily. But Robert was inflexible. "My decision is final. Hearing suspended until further notice." Marina left the courtroom in shock. Edward accompanied her to the parking lot, trying to offer words of comfort, but both knew the situation had become drastically complicated. If the emails were deemed authentic, Marina would face not only the destruction of her career, but possible criminal charges for active corruption. "Edward, how could someone have accessed my email?" Marina asked as they got into the car. "There are several ways," he replied grimly. "Hacking, social engineering, even someone with physical access to your computers. What worries me is the sophistication of the operation. These emails were not forged by amateurs." On the other side of London, Robert was living his own hell of doubts and suspicions. He had dismissed all his assistants and locked himself in his chambers with the documents presented at the hearing. Something was deeply wrong with those emails, but he needed technical help to prove his suspicions. At 6 in the evening, he called an old college friend, Mark Riley, who had built a solid career as a digital crime specialist. Mark worked for both private companies and the National Crime Agency on cases involving electronic fraud and digital document forgery. "Mark, I need a personal favor," Robert said when they met in a discreet downtown cafe. and it needs to stay strictly between us for now." Mark analyzed the emails for an hour, using specialized software on his laptop to examine codes, metadata, and formatting patterns that escaped the common human eye. "Robert, these documents are fake," he finally said, "and they're not amateur forgeries. Someone spent a lot of money and effort to create emails that would pass a superficial examination, but there are inconsistencies in the timestamps that only appear when you analyze the source code with specific tools." Robert felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief at having confirmation that Marina was being falsely incriminated, anger at discovering that someone was orchestrating a sophisticated operation to destroy an innocent person. "Mark, I need you to do a complete analysis and prepare an official technical report, and I need you to investigate who could have the technical capability and motivation to do something like this." Over the next few weeks, Mark worked discreetly to uncover the origin of the forgery. What he discovered was even more disturbing than Robert had imagined. The operation to incriminate Marina was just part of a larger scheme to manipulate the judicial process and protect the true culprits at the construction company. The investigation revealed that a group of executives from Aston and Associates Construction had hired a company specializing in digital manipulation to create false evidence against witnesses who could harm their defense. Marina had been chosen as a target because her testimony about irregularities in the tenders would be particularly damaging to them. Destroying her credibility was a strategy to discredit the entire process. But Mark discovered something even more shocking. The company responsible for the forgery had also deeply investigated Marina's personal life, and there were surveillance records that included photos of her with Robert. The operation was not just aimed at falsely incriminating her, it was aimed at creating a scandal that would compromise the very judge responsible for the case. "Robert, they know about you two," Mark said when they met again. "They have photos, hotel entry and exit records, even recordings of phone conversations. They are waiting for the right moment to use this information." The revelation hit Robert like lightning. Marina had not just distanced herself to protect both of them. She had distanced herself from a real and immediate danger. Someone was using their relationship as a weapon, preparing to destroy both of them at a strategic moment. That night, Robert walked through London trying to process the magnitude of the conspiracy they had discovered. It was not just a case of corruption in civil construction. It was a sophisticated operation of judicial manipulation that struck at the very foundations of the justice system. And Marina, the woman he loved, was at the center of the storm not by chance, but because someone had decided to use her as a sacrificial pawn. The decision he made that dawn would change everything. The next morning, Robert met with Mark and two National Crime Agency agents whom his friend knew and trusted completely. He presented all the evidence they had collected, explained the connection between the email forgery and the attempt to manipulate the judicial process, and requested a parallel official investigation. "Judge, do you understand that this could create complications for your own situation?" one of the agents asked diplomatically. "I understand perfectly," Robert replied, "but I cannot allow an innocent person to be destroyed to protect criminals, and I cannot allow the justice system to be manipulated in this way." Over the following days, the National Crime Agency worked discreetly to trace the origin of the forgery and identify everyone involved in the conspiracy. Meanwhile, Robert had to continue conducting the process normally, without letting on that he knew the truth behind the emails that had been presented against Marina. The tension was almost unbearable. He knew Marina was suffering, probably preparing for her life to be destroyed by false accusations, while he had to feign judicial neutrality and await the right moment to act. Each day that passed without being able to contact her, without being able to explain that he was fighting to protect her, was an emotional torture that tested all the limits of his self-control. Marina, in turn, lived her own days of torment. News of the fake emails had leaked to the press, and her professional reputation was being publicly demolished. Clients cancelled contracts, business partners preemptively distanced themselves, and she found herself professionally isolated overnight. Julia tried to offer support, but there wasn't much that could be done beyond waiting for the technical examination ordered by Robert to reveal the truth. The second hearing was scheduled for a Friday in December. Robert knew it would be the moment of truth. Either the forgery would be exposed and Marina would be exonerated, or she would be formally accused and her life would be ruined. There would be no middle ground. On the eve of the hearing, Mark delivered the technical report that definitively proved the email forgery, along with evidence identifying those responsible. The National Crime Agency had collected enough evidence to file formal charges against the construction company executives and the digital manipulation firm. Robert spent the night reviewing all the documents, preparing for the most important moment of his judicial career. It wasn't just about conducting another hearing, it was about exposing a conspiracy, protecting an innocent person, and perhaps, if he was lucky, recovering the love of his life. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and cloudy, as if the sky itself was tense with anticipation of what was to come. The courtroom was even more crowded that December Friday. The Aston and Associates construction case had gained national proportions, and journalists from across the country followed every development. Marina entered the court accompanied by Edward, trying to maintain her composure, despite knowing that this could be the day her professional life would end. Over the past few weeks, the defamation campaign based on the fake emails had been relentless. Her photo had appeared on the covers of major newspapers, under headlines that painted her as just another corrupt professional trying to profit from public tenders. Robert took the bench with his usual solemnity, but anyone who knew him well would notice the extra tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped almost imperceptibly on the desk. He carried with him not only the weight of the decision he was about to make, but also the evidence that could completely change the course of that process and of their lives. "I declare the session open," he announced, his voice echoing through the expectant silence of the room. "Before we proceed with the scheduled interrogations, I would like to announce that the technical forensic analysis requested on the documents presented at the previous hearing has been concluded." The public prosecutor leaned forward, interested. The defense lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Marina felt her heart quicken, knowing that the next few minutes would define her future. The technical report, prepared by expert Mark Riley of Digital Security Forensics, categorically concludes that the emails presented against witness Marina Foster are digital forgeries, Robert continued, his voice gaining strength. "Not only are they fake, but they were created with technical sophistication, indicating a professional evidence manipulation operation." A growing murmur took over the room. TV cameras turned to Marina, who closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. Edward squeezed her hand discreetly, whispering, "I knew you would prove it." But Robert was not finished. "Furthermore," he continued, raising his voice above the buzz, "during the investigation into the origin of this forgery, a broader conspiracy to manipulate this judicial process was discovered. I have here documents proving that executives from Aston and Associates Construction hired a company specializing in digital crimes to create false evidence against witnesses who could harm their defense." The construction company's lawyer abruptly stood up. "Your Honor, I object to—" "Silence," Robert ordered with authority. "I am not finished." The tension in the room was palpable. Marina watched Robert with a mixture of admiration and terror, sensing that something even bigger was coming. She knew that determined look, that posture of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. "The investigation also revealed," Robert continued, his words falling like bombs in the absolute silence of the room, "that this criminal operation included illegal surveillance of witness Marina Foster's personal life. Photographs, recordings, movement records, all collected illegally with the aim of creating scandals that could compromise not only the witness, but also this court." The public prosecutor frowned, beginning to understand the direction the revelation was heading. Marina felt her blood run cold in her veins. "It is my duty to inform you that this surveillance documented personal meetings between witness Marina Foster and this magistrate," Robert said, his voice remaining firm despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "Meetings which, I must clarify, occurred before Ms. Foster was called to this case, and which were discontinued the moment she was served with the summons to testify." The explosion of voices was immediate. Journalists shouted questions, lawyers stood up protesting, flashes went off in all directions. The scandal Marina had tried to avoid at all costs was being exposed in the most public way possible. "Silence in the court," Robert shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly. "Anyone who cannot maintain composure will be removed immediately." Gradually, the commotion subsided, but the tension remained electric. Marina was pale as paper, looking at Robert with a mixture of panic and incomprehension. Why was he doing this? Why was he publicly destroying both of them? "I declare myself recused from continuing to judge this case due to the revealed conflict of interest," Robert continued, ignoring the tears that began to appear in Marina's eyes. "I request that the case be immediately reassigned to another magistrate, but before I withdraw from this room, there is one last matter to be resolved." It was at this moment that the back doors of the room opened, and 3 National Crime Agency agents entered carrying arrest warrants. The silence that followed was sepulchral. "Federal agents are here to execute arrest warrants against Charles Aston, CEO of the construction company, and Robert Maxwell, operational director, for crimes of falsifying public documents, obstruction of justice, criminal association, and active corruption," Robert announced. "Digital Solutions is also being investigated for its participation in this criminal operation." The ensuing chaos was indescribable. Charles Aston tried to leave through the side door, but was intercepted by federal agents. His lawyer shouted about procedural irregularities as his client was handcuffed before television cameras. Robert Maxwell, apparently anticipating what was happening, had not appeared at the hearing and would be arrested later. Marina watched everything as if in a dream or nightmare. In a matter of minutes, she had been exonerated, the true culprits were being arrested, and her personal life had been exposed nationally. She felt simultaneously relieved and terrified of the consequences to come. Robert banged his gavel one last time. "I declare this session closed. The case will be reassigned as determined by the court's internal oversight body." As the room gradually emptied amidst a deafening buzz, Marina remained seated, trying to process what had just happened. Robert had sacrificed his career to protect her and expose the truth. He had chosen justice and love above his professional ambition, and now both would have to face the consequences of that choice. In the weeks that followed, the scandal dominated national headlines. The case was dubbed by the media Operation Clean Robe, and Robert became simultaneously a hero and a villain, depending on the political perspective of those commenting. Conservatives attacked him for mixing personal life with professional responsibilities, while progressives defended him as a symbol of ethical courage in a corrupt judicial system. Marina faced her own media storm. Her photo was in every magazine, her personal life was publicly dissected, and she found herself at the center of national debates on ethics, justice, and forbidden relationships. Some painted her as an opportunist who seduced a judge for her own benefit, others as a victim of a conspiracy that almost destroyed her life. Professionally, the consequences were devastating for both. Robert was immediately suspended from his duties, while the Judicial Conduct Committee conducted a disciplinary investigation. Even having acted with integrity in exposing corruption, he had violated ethical protocols by not recusing himself the moment he learned of Marina's involvement in the process. The suspension could last months, and there was a real possibility of permanent dismissal. Marina saw her professional career crumble almost overnight. Clients cancelled contracts for fear of association with the scandal. Business partners preemptively distanced themselves, and even employees resigned due to pressure from their families. The firm she had built with so much sacrifice was on the verge of bankruptcy in a matter of weeks. For 2 weeks, after the explosive hearing, Marina and Robert did not speak, not for lack of will, but because any contact would be interpreted as proof that the relationship continued to influence judicial decisions, even with his suspension. Edward advised Marina to maintain total distance until the situation stabilized, and Robert's lawyer gave the same advice. It was Marina who broke the silence. On a rainy January afternoon, she appeared at Robert's apartment door. He opened the door expecting to find a journalist or investigator, and instead found the woman he loved, drenched in rain, with red eyes from crying, but determined. "Can I come in?" she asked simply. Robert hugged her before even answering, and both cried at the entrance, tears of pain, of relief, of love that had survived everything they tried to destroy. "Why did you do that?" Marina asked when she finally managed to speak. "Why did you sacrifice everything?" "Because I love you," Robert replied with absolute simplicity. "Because I couldn't let them destroy you to protect criminals. Because some things are more important than a career." That night, they made love like survivors of a shipwreck who had finally found each other on solid ground. It was different from other times, more desperate, more intense, loaded with gratitude for still being alive and together. Between caresses and whispers, they planned how they would face what was to come together. The decision they made that dawn would change the course of their lives again. "Let's go away," Marina said, embraced by Robert's chest. "For a few weeks, a few months. We need time to heal, to think, to decide how to rebuild our lives." Robert agreed immediately. London had become a media battlefield where their every move was interpreted and analyzed. They needed distance, silence, space to rediscover who they were when not in the center of a national storm. A week later, they discreetly disappeared from the city. Robert had received authorization from the Judicial Conduct Committee to travel during his suspension period, and Marina delegated the firm's administration to her most trusted partner. They went to an isolated resort on the coast of Cornwall, where they could just be two people trying to heal from public traumas. The first few days were difficult. Both were accustomed to intense routines, constant pressures, responsibilities that defined their identities. Suddenly, they had only each other and infinite time to process everything that had happened. They talked for hours about regrets and choices, about love and sacrifice, about the price of integrity in a corrupt world. But gradually, they began to heal. Walks on the beach at dawn replaced work meetings. Romantic candlelit dinners took the place of obligatory social events. Unhurried nights of love filled the hours previously dedicated to legal cases and architectural projects. For an entire month, they lived as if the outside world did not exist. Robert rediscovered the man he had been before carrying the weight of justice on his shoulders. Marina found again the woman who dreamed of projects that changed lives, not just lucrative contracts. But they knew they couldn't run forever. The real world awaited them, with all its consequences and opportunities for rebuilding. The call that changed everything came on a February morning. The call Mark made that sunny February morning brought news that changed everything. Robert answered the phone while Marina prepared breakfast on the balcony of the suite they had called home for almost 2 months. "Robert, I need to tell you what's happening in London," Mark said, his voice carrying an excitement he couldn't hide. "The trial of the construction executives has become a national spectacle. They are being judged by a popular jury, and public opinion has completely shifted. You've become a symbol of integrity." Over the next hour, Mark reported how the National Crime Agency investigation had revealed a much larger corruption scheme than they initially imagined. Digital Solutions, the company hired to forge evidence against Marina, had provided similar services to dozens of other companies involved in fraudulent tenders. The scandal had spread across the country, bringing down politicians, businessmen, and even other magistrates who were truly involved in corruption. "The difference," Mark explained, "is that you two are the only ones in this whole story who acted ethically from beginning to end. Marina never accepted bribes. You exposed the corruption, even knowing it would cost you dearly. The media is painting you as the Romeo and Juliet of English justice." Marina listened to the conversation with growing disbelief. For weeks, they had lived believing their careers were over, that they had become professional pariahs because of ethical choices. Discovering that the national narrative had changed was simultaneously relieving and surreal. But the most important news was yet to come. "The Judicial Conduct Committee has concluded the investigation into your conduct, Robert," Mark continued. "The decision was unanimous. You will be reinstated to your position. They recognized that, although you violated protocols by not immediately recusing yourself, your subsequent actions demonstrated exceptional integrity and contributed significantly to exposing systemic corruption." Robert sat down heavily, processing the information. After months of believing he had destroyed his judicial career, he discovered that he would not only be reinstated, but likely promoted. The Judicial Conduct Committee had decided that his example of placing ethics above personal convenience should be celebrated, not punished. "And there's more," Mark added. "You've been invited to lead a new national commission to combat judicial corruption. It would be a significant promotion, with the possibility of national impact." For Marina, the news was equally surprising. During her absence, Julia had kept the firm running and reported that new clients were specifically seeking their services. Apparently, being a victim of a criminal conspiracy and maintaining integrity under pressure had become a valuable credential in the market. Social housing projects, companies committed to transparency, non-governmental organizations, all wanted to work with the architect who had proven her honesty in the most public way possible. "Some contracts we lost came back," Julia explained in a later call. "It seems companies realized that canceling projects with us because of false accusations was a mistake, and we have a waiting list of new clients who specifically want to work with the architect who couldn't be bought." That night, Marina and Robert walked along the beach in silence, processing how their lives had changed again in a matter of hours. What seemed to be the destruction of their careers had transformed into unique opportunities to rebuild them on even stronger foundations. "Do you want to go back?" Marina asked, stopping to look at the stars shining over the ocean. "I do," Robert replied without hesitation, "but only if it's with you. I no longer want to live pretending that you're not the most important part of my life. Even knowing that there will always be people criticizing our relationship, especially for that," he said, pulling her into a hug. "We've already proven that we can maintain professional integrity even while loving each other. Now it's time to prove that true love survives any storm." Their return to London 2 weeks later was triumphant in ways neither had anticipated. Robert was welcomed at court with applause from his colleagues, and Marina found her firm running better than when she had left. Adversity had forced both to delegate responsibilities, to trust their teams, to build organizations less dependent on their constant presence. The trial of the construction executives was broadcast nationally and became a landmark in the history of English justice. Charles Aston was sentenced to 12 years in prison for criminal association, active corruption, and obstruction of justice. Robert Maxwell received a similar sentence, and Digital Solutions was permanently shut down, with its executives also arrested. During the trial, both Marina and Robert testified as witnesses, but this time in different courts and on specific technical aspects of their areas of expertise. The professional separation they had established worked perfectly. No one questioned the integrity of their testimonies or suggested favoritism. Media coverage was intense, but the tone had completely changed. Instead of a romantic scandal, the press portrayed the story as an example of how true love and professional integrity could coexist. Articles were written about the couple who saved justice. Documentaries were produced about judicial corruption, using their story as a positive example. Marina found herself in the unusual position of being sought after for lectures on business ethics and professional integrity. Universities invited her to speak about resistance to corruption. International organizations wanted to hear her perspective on transparency in public tenders. She discovered she had a talent for communication and a passion for educating others about the values that had almost cost her career. Robert, in his new position on the National Anti-Corruption Commission, traveled the country implementing protocols that made it harder to manipulate judicial processes. His personal experience with blackmail and manipulation attempts had made him an expert in identifying and preventing these practices. Ironically, the attack he suffered had transformed him into the most qualified magistrate in the country to combat similar crimes. Over the following months, they built a life together that balanced professional ambition with personal happiness. They lived in Robert's apartment, which Marina had redesigned to incorporate an office where she could work on smaller projects. They had dinner together whenever possible, sometimes traveled for work together, and gradually built a routine that honored both their careers and their relationship. 6 months after their return, Marina made a discovery that would change everything again. She was reviewing the final projects for the housing complex that had been interrupted during the scandal. when she noticed something extraordinary in the numbers. The project had not only been successfully completed after the corrupt construction company was removed, but was serving as a model for housing programs across the country. Her work was being replicated in 10 different counties, benefiting thousands of families who previously had no access to decent housing. "Robert," she said that night, showing him the reports she had received, "remember when you said some things are more important than a career?" "I remember perfectly." "I think we were thinking too small," Marina said, smiling. "It wasn't about choosing between career and love. It was about discovering what kind of career and what kind of love are worth having." Robert understood immediately. The sacrifices they had made, the pain they faced, the losses they suffered, everything had resulted in better versions of themselves and in careers that truly made a difference in the world. It was at that moment that he knew he was ready for the next step. The planning took 2 months. Robert wanted it to be perfect, not for ostentation, but because Marina deserved a moment that honored both the difficult journey they had traveled and the bright future they would build together. He chose the Grand Brighton Hotel, the same place where they had met on that night that changed their lives forever. But instead of the main hall where they met, he reserved the suite where they spent their first night together, now completely renovated, but symbolically powerful. On a Thursday in November, exactly 1 year after the hearing that exposed the conspiracy, Robert invited Marina to dinner at the hotel. She accepted without suspicion, thinking it was just a romantic celebration of what they had overcome. The suite was decorated with elegant simplicity, candles, flowers, a spectacular view of the illuminated Brighton seafront. Marina was touched by the romantic gesture, but it was only when Robert led her to the balcony that she understood something bigger was happening. "Marina," he said, taking her hands and looking directly into her eyes. "Exactly 1 year ago in this city, our lives were turned upside down. We lost careers, reputations, certainties. We faced threats, betrayals, scandals. We had to choose between security and integrity, between convenience and love." Marina felt tears begin to form, sensing what was to come. "But I discovered something this past year," Robert continued. "I discovered that there is no happiness without risk, that there is no true love without sacrifice, that there is no full life without the courage to fight for what truly matters." He knelt before her, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Marina Foster, you taught me that some battles are worth fighting, that some people are worth any sacrifice, that true love is not a luxury we cannot afford. It is the only thing without which we cannot live." Marina was crying openly now, but they were tears of absolute joy. "Will you marry me?" Robert asked, opening the box to reveal a simple but perfect diamond ring. "Will you build a life where we never again have to choose between love and integrity, because we will have both?" "Yes," Marina replied without hesitation. "Yes, yes, yes." When Robert placed the ring on her finger, Marina remembered the first night they spent together in that same place. 2 lonely people who met by chance and discovered they were destined to face storms together. Now, a year later, they had survived the biggest possible storm and emerged stronger, more united, more certain that the love they felt was indestructible. The kiss they shared on the balcony of that suite was not the first, nor would it be the last. But it was the kiss of certainty, of promise, of the future they would build side by side. A kiss that sealed not only a romantic commitment, but a life partnership based on shared values, mutual courage, and unconditional love. When they separated, Marina looked at the city that had almost destroyed them and now welcomed them back as heroes. She looked at the man who had risked everything to protect her and discovered that she had found not only a husband, but a partner in the mission to make the world a fairer and more honest place. "Promise me we will always choose love and truth," she asked. "I promise," Robert replied, "even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." And at that moment, looking at the lights of Brighton glittering like stars at sea level, both knew they had found the kind of love that survives any storm, the kind of love that is worth any sacrifice, that makes any struggle possible to win, that transforms even the greatest adversities into opportunities to grow together. The future stretched before them full of possibilities: marriage, children, careers that would continue to make a difference in the world, a life built on solid foundations of mutual trust and shared values. But at that moment, all that mattered was that they had chosen each other, forever, in any circumstance. A few years later, when they told their story to their children, they would say that it was love that saved them. But the truth was more complex and more beautiful. It was the conscious choice to fight for love day after day, even when the whole world seemed to conspire against them, that transformed an initial passion into an indestructible, lifelong partnership. The kiss that changed everything was not the first they shared, but the last they exchanged as singles. From then on, every kiss would be part of a larger story, the story of two integral professionals who proved that it is possible to succeed without compromising values, to love without losing identity, and to build an extraordinary life based on courageous choices and true love.